Spelling by the numbers, signs for sounds. Welcome, thanks for joining us. Today we're going to talk about spelling. You know, those of us who can spell reasonably well take our good spelling for granted. It seems to be simple, something any reasonably intelligent person should be able to do. But for many of our students, learning to spell is very challenging. Spelling by the numbers means looking at the various types of words students must learn to spell and what research says about effective spelling instruction. We want to make sure our students learn to spell the words they need to become competent readers and writers. You'll be introduced to Signs for Sounds, a research-based systematic spelling program. Students learn to spell words with regular phonetic spelling patterns and high-frequency words. Signs for Sounds is not part of Read Live, and it is not a software program. These teacher-led lessons can be presented to a small group or to an individual student. Signs for Sounds covers phonics skills typically taught in first grade through third grade, but it's an appropriate intervention for students up through eighth grade who still need instruction in regular phonetic spelling patterns and high-frequency words. Many schools use it as an effective intervention alongside Read Naturally Live or Read Naturally Encore. And if you're already using Signs for Sounds, this webinar will deepen your understanding of the program and give you some helpful tips. First, let's talk about the importance of spelling, why learning to spell matters, and the relationship spelling has to reading or writing. Have you ever heard a student or a parent or even another staff member question whether spelling is still important? After all, we have technology that allows us to spell check our writing and voice recognition software that will transcribe our speech into written words. So, should we be spending a lot of time teaching spelling these days? According to the spelling and grammar tool on Microsoft Word, this poem is very polished. Only the words "its" and "told" were identified as possible errors. But we can see that all of these words in red font are not correctly used in this poem. It's a good reminder that you cannot depend on a spell checker to determine whether or not a word is used correctly. One study reported that spell checkers usually catch just 30 to 80% of misspellings overall, partly because they miss homophone errors like for, F-O-U-R, versus for, F-O-R. Another problem is that students who are very poor spellers don't usually get close enough to the spelling of a word for the spell checker to suggest the right word. In fact, for students with learning disabilities, spell checkers identified the target word from their misspellings only 53% of the time. Spelling is important because it impacts reading and writing. Research has shown that learning to spell and learning to read rely on much of the same underlying knowledge. That is, the relationships between letters and sounds. And we know that spelling instruction can be designed to help children better understand that key knowledge, which then supports their reading development. We also know that good spelling skills support writing. Good spellers concentrate on the content and write more fluently. Poor spellers may tend to restrict what they write to words that they can spell, which limits their verbal power. Or they may lose track of their thoughts when they get stuck trying to spell a word. Let's take a quick look at what research tells us about which words students should learn to spell and which strategies are most effective so we can teach smarter. What do you notice about the word cards on this slide? Yes, some words are in black font and some are in red font. The words in black font have regular spelling patterns and are decodable. Students can decode them by sounding them out. The words in red font have irregular spelling patterns and they're not decodable. Students cannot completely decode them by sounding them out. What does research say about how we learn to spell these different kinds of words? Well, researchers have debated for decades about whether or not the brain uses a single root method for spelling and reading all types of words. Using neuroimaging data, researchers have now been able to show that different parts of the brain are active during word spelling based on whether the word has regular or irregular sound to letter spelling patterns. They observed that regular words were usually processed using letter to sound correspondences to encode and decode the word in one part of the brain. We'll call those words sound out words. And they observed that irregular words were stored and retrieved from word-specific memory in another part of the brain. We'll call those words spell-out words. This research provides brain-based implications for teaching regular and irregular words differently. The spelling of words in English is more regular and pattern-based than you might think. About 50% of English words have regular spelling patterns. That means that the letters used to spell these words predictably represent their sound patterns. Some examples are hot, black, and plain. Another 37% of English words have only one error if they are spelled on the basis of sound symbol correspondences alone. Typically, that error would occur in spelling a vowel sound. For example, most of the syllables in the word temperature have regular spelling patterns, but the third syllable has the schwa sound. If a student wants to spell the word temperature and has learned that all vowels sometimes make the schwa sound, the sound alone will not help him to spell the word. The specific vowel needed for the third syllable in temperature, the letter A, must be memorized. The remaining 13% of English words must be learned as irregular words. An example is the word ocean. We know that being able to read and spell high-frequency words has a big payoff. Consider this. 8 words account for 18% of all the words students typically need to read and write. 25 words account for 33%. 100 words account for 50%, and 300 words account for 65%. So teaching smarter means planning instruction for students to master reading and spelling high-frequency words. Here is a useful list of the first 200 high-frequency words. The column on the left-hand side of this page lists the irregular high-frequency words in their order of frequency. These words must be learned by memory as spell-out words. The columns on the right-hand side list the high-frequency words with regular spelling patterns. These are organized by common vowel spellings, and they can be taught as sound-out words in phonics or spelling lessons featuring the corresponding spelling patterns. Words with a regular spelling pattern should be taught using letter-sound correspondences as sound-out words. The student identifies the individual sounds in a word and then chooses the correct letter or letters to represent each sound. For example, when teaching a student to spell the word just, the student must first recognize that the word has 4 sounds. Then the student must associate each sound in the word with the letter that represents that sound. Sometimes the sound is represented by more than one letter. For example, for the word smash, the student must first determine that the word has 4 sounds. And then the student must remember that the sound sh is represented by the 2 letters sh. Irregular words should be taught as spell-out words with a system that supports word-specific memory, using an I do it, we do it, you do it model. Let's see how this strategy works with the word they. I'll be the teacher, and you can be the student. First, it's my turn. Just listen to me. They, T-H-E-Y, they. Next, do it with me. Ready? They, T-H-E-Y, they. Now, your turn. So just the students would be responding. Ready? They, T-H-E-Y, they. There is one more piece of research about spelling instruction that we need to keep in mind. Research shows that the test, study, test method is the single most effective practice in spelling instruction. This involves having the student, under the teacher's direction, correct his or her own errors immediately after taking a spelling pretest. Following each word, or at the end of the pretest, the teacher spells each word, emphasizing each letter, as the student points to each letter being pronounced. Using a colored pencil or pen, the student puts a dot under the incorrect part of the word and then writes the word correctly off to the side. This technique allows the student to see which words are difficult, locate the part of the word that is troublesome, and correct errors. Researchers found that when students use this technique, they score significantly higher on final spelling tests. Now, let's see how this research is applied in Signs for Sounds. There are two levels. Signs for Sounds Level 1 addresses first grade level phonics skills needed by beginning spellers and readers. Students learn to spell about 400 words with regular spelling patterns and the first 50 high-frequency words. Level 2 reviews the skills taught in Level 1 at a faster pace and then continues on to second and third grade level phonics skills. Nearly half of these lessons deal with words that have 2 or more syllables. Students learn to spell 800 more words with regular spelling patterns and the first 100 high-frequency words. Each level has a lesson guide booklet that guides the teacher through the content for each lesson, and a booklet of reproducible masters with corresponding student lesson forms and dictation forms. The teacher's manual gives detailed directions for implementing both levels with small groups or with individual students. This slide shows the lesson guide page for Level 1, Lesson 11. In Lessons 1 through 10, students learned consonant-vowel-consonant words, and now Lesson 11 reviews several short vowel sounds. The teacher reminds students that they must listen for each of the 3 sounds in each word. Notice in column A, the word not is underlined because not is a high-frequency word. It appears in the sound out word list because it's a consonant-vowel-consonant word with the short O sound. Notice the spell out word below the word lists. The word of is presented as an irregular high-frequency word. This slide shows the lesson guide page for Level 2, Lesson 9. The word lists in this lesson feature the consonant digraphs SH and TH. Notice that the high-frequency words that, this, than, then, them, with, and these are underlined. They appear in the word lists because they are all sound-out words with the consonant digraph TH. Notice the spell-out word they is represented as an irregular high-frequency word. You can see these sound-out words and the spell-out word they on this high-frequency word list that we looked at earlier. Here they are organized by their vowel sound, but they appear in Lesson 9 because they begin or end with the consonant digraph TH. You have a full-size copy of this on page 7 in your handout. Remember, the first 100 high-frequency words make up 50% of the words in students' reading and writing. So as this lesson is presented, teachers will emphasize these words and continue to teach them until they are mastered. Let's walk through a lesson. This is Lesson 8 in Signs for Sounds Level 2. For the teaching and testing phase, the teacher prepares by reproducing a student lesson form for each student from the Blackline Masters booklet. And the teacher can quickly prepare to teach the content by reviewing the brief notes in the lesson guide. Each word in this lesson begins or ends with a consonant blend with R, L, or S. Notice the sound out word just in the first practice list in P1. Just is underlined because it is a high frequency word with the ending consonant blend ST. And the spell out word R is presented as an irregular high frequency word. The teacher distributes the blank lesson form to each student. The teacher explains that students must listen carefully to the sounds in each word, because in this lesson, a word may begin or end with two consonants, and each consonant is represented by a letter. The teacher may demonstrate by saying a word and having students identify the two consonants at the beginning or end of the word. Then the teacher demonstrates how students should circle the needed letters on the lesson form. As the teacher dictates each word, the student selects a letter to represent each sound, one word per row. When the vowel says its long sound and the silent E is needed, the student must trace the dotted E. When the vowel sound says its short sound and the E is not needed, the student must cross out the dotted E. I'll be the teacher and you can be a student. Follow along on the lesson form at the bottom of page 8 in your handout. Listen to the first word, stop. What word? I always have students repeat the word so I can be sure that they're hearing the word correctly. Now, using row 1, circle a letter to represent each each sound in stop. Decide if you need the silent E. If you need silent E, trace it. If you don't need silent E, cross it out. This student, Abby, selected the letters S and T in the first section to represent the beginning consonant blend. The letter O in the middle section to represent the short vowel sound, and the letter P in the last section to represent the ending sound. She crossed out the silent E, which is not needed for a short vowel sound, and then she wrote the word stop. Signs for Sounds uses the test, study, test technique, so Abby corrects her own errors immediately after completing each word. I direct students to put a colored pencil under each letter as I say the letters in the word. S-T-O-P. Abby will put a dot under any errors and then rewrite the word. In this case, her word is correct. Check your lesson form. Did you get the word stop correct? The next word is grade. What word? Circle each letter you need to spell the word grade. If you need silent E, trace it. If you don't need silent E, cross it out. Abby circled the letter that represents each sound. She traced the dotted E, which is needed to make the long A sound, and then she wrote the word. She puts her colored pencil under each letter as I say the letters G-R-A-D-E. Abby spelled the word correctly. Did you check your word? The next word is flag. What word? Circle each letter you need to spell the word flag. Abby circled the letters that represent each sound. She crossed out the dotted E, which is not needed to make the short A sound, and then she wrote the word. She checks each letter as I say the letters. F-L-A-G. She spelled the word correctly. Did you check your word? The next word is smile. What word? Circle each letter you need to make the word smile. Abby circled the letter for each sound. She crossed out the dotted E and then wrote the word. She checks each letter as I say the letters, S-M-I-L-E. But this time, she did not trace the dotted E for this long vowel word, so she puts a dot under her error and writes the word off to the side. The lesson continues following this procedure. Notice that number 7 is the word just, the high frequency word that is underlined in the lesson guide. I'll make sure my students master this word. As you can see, Signs for Sounds is structured for students to be successful. They must segment the sounds and then choose the letter that represents each sound or pattern. You can see how this sound symbol connection supports reading development. Teachers have also recognized the value of using this format for teaching English language learners because the student lesson form provides forced choices for each sound in the word. Students quickly learn the sound associated with each letter or letter pattern in English, which supports reading development and correct pronunciation. Next, the teacher presents the spell out word. Put yourself in the role of the student again. Our spell out word for today is are. My turn. Just listen. Are. A-R-E. Are. Now do it with me. Ready? Are. A-R-E. Are. Now you do it. It's your turn. Ready? And you would say are. A-R-E. Are. Next, the teacher directs students to practice the spell out word independently at the bottom of the student lesson form. The student says the word, traces or writes each letter, and then says the word again. Here's how Abby practices the word are. R, A-R-E, R, A-R-E, R, A-R-E, R, A-R-E, R, A-R-E, R, A-R-E. She continues until all the words are complete. Then she self-corrects each word by comparing them to the first model. Here's something important to consider. Beginning readers and spellers are usually very successful at encoding or spelling the sound out words using the student lesson form. But we also need to make sure that they can decode the words that they have spelled. At the end of the teaching phase, you may want to direct each student to read the list of words from top to bottom or from bottom to top, or call out the number of a word and call on a student to read that word. To maximize progress, make sure your students are making connection between the letters and the sounds, and that they can read as well as spell the words. Now that students have been taught the words, it's time for the test. Students fold their papers back vertically along the dotted line. The teacher dictates 10 sound out words and the spell out word. Students must spell the words without looking back at the practice side. The teacher can differentiate the test depending on how quickly students are learning to spell the words. For example, for students who are struggling, I will dictate the sound out words from the practice list P1 in exactly the same order they were presented during the practice. For students who are doing well, I'll dictate the sound out words from the mastery list M1, which may include some new words with the featured pattern. If students do not perform well on the test, I may choose to repeat the same lesson the next day using the other practice list P2. And actually, all 4 lists work with this student lesson form for lesson 8. So I can repeat this lesson several times until my students master the featured pattern. Abby got all of her words correct, so she's ready to move on to the last part of the lesson. The last phase of this lesson includes judicious review of the high-frequency words and dictation sentences. We use the lesson guide on the left for the teaching and testing phases of the lesson. Now we'll use the page on the right for the dictation phase and review of the high-frequency sound out word. The high-frequency, spell out words. The spell out word for this lesson is the word are. The spell out word are also appears as the first word in the dictation phase. Students learned the high-frequency words was and in the 2 previous lessons. So students are tested again on these words in the dictation phase. The dictation sentences include many of the sound out words from this lesson. And the spell out word from this lesson and the previous lesson are used in the sentences to give students yet another opportunity to show that they can spell these high frequency words accurately. The long column on the far right lists all of the spell out words that have been taught so far. The teacher can choose 3 words from this list to recycle into each lesson for review number 4, 5, and 6. For this lesson, students will review you, to, and of. If students continue to misspell a word, it can appear in the review section for several lessons and then reappear again later on if students begin to misspell it in their daily writing. There are 2 sets of dictation sentences, set A and set B. Set A has 3 sentences with a total of 18 words. The corresponding student dictation form has spaces to fit these 5, 6, and 7 word sentences. Notice the 2 lines under the space for the first word in each sentence to remind a student to begin with a capital letter, and the short line at the end of each sentence as a prompt for end punctuation. Set B also has 3 sentences, but they are longer and more challenging, with a total of 27 words. The corresponding student dictation form has the appropriate number of spaces for these 8, 9, and 10 word sentences. And the teacher can decide which set of sentences is most appropriate for her student or for her group, depending on their skill level or the amount of time that might be available on a given day. Here is Abby's dictation form for lesson 8. She spelled all of the spell out words correctly, so you can see in the score box that her score is 6 correct out of 6 possible. She also spelled all of the words in the dictation sentences correctly, so her score is 18 correct out of 18 possible. And her teacher circled "Great job" and "Nice handwriting" and awarded her 2 bonus points. Here's Abby's score sheet for level 2. At the top of each column, the star indicates she got the spell out word correct. Every 5th lesson, the spell out words are reviewed. Abby shades in the number of sound out words she got correct for each lesson. She got all 10 words correct on lesson number 8. Then she enters her scores for the spell out word review and the dictation sentences along with the bonus points. She has now completed lesson 8. Now let's take a step back and talk about spelling assessment. If we want to teach spelling smarter, we need to assess students to identify their strengths and needs in spelling. By finding out what students already know and what they need to learn, we can provide more targeted instruction. As students receive ongoing instruction, it's important to monitor their progress to be sure the instruction is improving their spelling skills and to confirm that the growth is maintained over time. And a spelling assessment can be used as a post-test to document improvement at the end of an intervention cycle, at the end of a level, or at the end of a school year. You can download a free assessment packet from the Read Naturally website. It includes Signs for Sounds Level 1 and Level 2 assessments. These assessments will help you determine whether or not your students would benefit from working in Signs for Sounds, and you can use the results to place students in the appropriate level. This spelling assessment for Level 1 assesses beginning readers and spellers. The assessment is given over 3 sessions. The teacher dictates 1 column of words at each session. The teacher can then look across each row to determine strengths and weaknesses in a specific consonant or in vowel sounds. For example, in the first row, the student misspelled 2 out of 3 words with the short U sound. The items on this diagnostic prescriptive assessment correspond to specific lessons in Signs for Sounds 1. For example, short U is taught in lessons 13 and 14. Most first grade beginning readers and spellers will complete all of the lessons in level 1. But for an older student who is still working at this skill level, the teacher can fast forward the student through just the skills the student needs based on the assessment. This assessment for level 2 assesses readers and spellers who are working at a second or third grade phonics skill level. Most second and many third graders will complete all of the level 2 lessons. But like level 1, the level 2 assessment items correspond to specific lessons. So a teacher can target instruction for an older student based on the assessment results. And here's a tip. Instructional time is valuable, and we don't want to spend unnecessary time on assessment. These Signs for Sounds assessments cover the sequence of phonics skills taught in the primary grades. They can be used to screen a whole group or a whole class of students to quickly identify which students may need an individual one-to-one phonics assessment. Each level has a class planning sheet designed to organize and plan instruction. Morgan's teacher has put an X in the space below each lesson Morgan needs to do based on her assessment results. Notice there are some lessons she doesn't need to do at the beginning of level 1, but she needs to do most of the lessons in the last half of the level. Her teacher may add some students with similar needs to this planning sheet and form a small group. These are the spell out words assessments included in the Blackline Masters booklets for level 1 and 2. You can use these as a pretest and then later on as a post-test to show progress. You can also use them to progress monitor throughout the year to identify words that you may want to recycle as review words. So as you can see, Signs for Sounds is structured for students to be highly successful in spelling sound out words and high frequency words. Teachers know they are working smarter because students are learning to spell the words they need to become competent readers and writers. And Signs for Sounds builds proficiency in spelling while reinforcing reading skills. Many teachers have paired Read Naturally Live or Read Naturally Encore with Signs for Sounds to accelerate their students' reading development. One researcher summarized the connection between reading and spelling this way. Spelling and reading build and rely on the same mental representation of a word. Knowing the spelling of a word makes the representation of it sturdy and accessible for fluent reading. If you would like to take a closer look at Signs for Sounds materials, we have some resources available on the Read Naturally website. Downloadable samples are available for level 1 and level 2. I'll flip through the level 1 sample so you can see what's included. There's a program overview, which includes a list of all the skills taught in both levels, an overview of the lesson materials, a detailed description of the teaching and testing phase materials, the dictation phase materials, and the score sheet, and an in-depth description of the lesson steps, and the materials for lesson 14. You can also download the assessment packet. This includes the sound out word assessments for level 1 and level 2 that we just looked at. As registrations came in for this webinar, one teacher asked about meaningful spelling activities that students could practice independently after instruction. Here's a great free resource. You can download word sorts for each level. There is a word sort for each lesson. You can assign the word sort as independent work to give students additional practice in reading and spelling the words from their current lesson. The cover sheet gives directions and suggests how you can differentiate the assignment to meet specific needs. This is the word sort Abby was assigned for lesson 8. When she finished, her teacher directed her to read the words down each column and then across each row to confirm that she is able to read each word within the pattern reading down the columns, mix the patterns by reading across the rows, and then read the out of sort high frequency words. Well, we've gathered the questions that many of you asked on the registration forms for this webinar. And many of those questions have been answered in the presentation, but we picked out several to answer now. Several people asked questions that were similar to this one. Is this intervention one that can be used with 3rd through 5th graders who struggle with basic phonological awareness issues and decoding? Well, this program is an ideal intervention for students who are in the middle grades and reading 2 to 3 years below grade level. It allows you to teach the phonics skills they need in a new way by coming in the back door through spelling. They have a fresh approach to instruction. As they listen for the number of sounds in a word and then select the letter or letters that represent each sound, they're using phonological awareness skills. And if you're diligent about having students read the words back to you at the end of the teaching phase and the testing phase, you can reinforce their decoding skills. Remember what the researcher I mentioned earlier said. Knowing the spelling of a word makes the representation of it sturdy and accessible for fluent reading. We've already talked about how you can assess students to determine what they know and what they still need to learn. So you can target skills that these students need to learn and move at a fast forward pace through just the lessons that these older students need. And you can differentiate the program by repeating difficult lessons using those alternate word lists and putting difficult high frequency spell out words in the review list for as long as necessary. We also had several questions asking about students with dyslexia. One of them said, do you have any special guidelines for students with dyslexia? Well, I have used Signs for Sounds with reading disabled students for many years with great results. Students like Signs for Sounds because they quickly recognize they can spell the words. And the student lesson forms are designed for every student to be successful. Think about the scaffolding that's provided by the forced letter choices for each sound. And here's some tips for working with students who may have been diagnosed with dyslexia. As you present a word in the teaching phase, ask students to repeat the word to be sure they've heard it correctly. You may need to break the instruction down even more to sound by sound. For example, in the beginning lessons in level 1, ask students how many sounds they hear in the word. Have them identify the first sound and then choose the letter that represents that sound. Repeat the word to them and check that they have chosen the correct first letter. Then have them identify the next sound and choose the letter that represents that sound. Repeat the word to them again and check that they have chosen the correct vowel. Then have them identify the final sound and choose the letter that represents that sound. Check that they have chosen the correct final letter and then ask them to write the word and then read the word back to you. And you can reteach lessons using those alternate word lists until students have mastered a spelling pattern. Students learn a technique for practicing spell out words, and the judicious review for those irregular high frequency words always ensures mastery. Even the dictation form is designed for student success. I've found that reading disabled students respond really well to the structure of this program, and I think you'll see great results. Okay, let's do one final question. Does this work with students who know less than 10 sight words at this point? Well, yes, knowing about 10 sight words would be one good criteria for beginning to work in level 1. The other criteria is that students know letter names, many letter sounds, and that they're beginning to blend consonant, vowel, consonant words. In the first few lessons, you might want to break words down sound by sound like I described in the last question. And for beginning readers working from the beginning of level 1, it works really well to look at the skills taught in each lesson and then pair lessons with the same skills that students are learning in their reading and phonics instruction. This is our Read Naturally contact information. And we'd just like to encourage you, if you have further questions or if you'd like some more information, to contact us and we'll be happy to help you. Thanks for joining us for this webinar.